It's October 8th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to Singapore. The South Korean leader is set to hold key meetings with Singaporean leaders on Tuesday to ink deals on cooperation in areas like advanced technology and energy security. Missile strikes and fighting continued on the first day of the anniversary of the October 7th attacks, with Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah all targeting Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared on Monday that his country would continue its offensive. Samsung Electronics estimated its third quarter operating profit at 9.1 trillion won, or around $6.8 billion. It's up over 274% from a year earlier, but also a drop from the second quarter, which saw an operating profit of over 10 trillion won. After wrapping up his visit to the Philippines, President Yoon Suk-yeol is now in Singapore. He'll have a tight schedule as he focuses on economic exchanges with the port nation. Our Kim Do-yeon has what to expect.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is looking to enhance cooperation with Singapore as he starts a state visit to the Southeast Asian country, the second stop on his tour of Southeast Asia for the ASEAN summit. Yoon on Monday evening touched down in Singapore and is set to start his official engagements on Tuesday. President Yoon will receive an official welcome at Singapore's Parliament House and meet President Tharman Shanmugaratnam. Afterward, he will meet Prime Minister Lawrence Wong for a summit. The two leaders are set to sign MOUs before speaking to the press. There will also be a luncheon followed by a meeting with Senior Minister Lee Hsien-loong. In the evening, President Tharman will host a state banquet for the first couple. The state visit to Singapore comes as South Korea and Singapore will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties next year. Singapore has become South Korea's second largest trade and investment partner among ASEAN members, and Yoon's visit is set to focus on economic exchanges.
Having closely cooperated over the past 50 years, focusing on trade and investment, the two sides would expand into areas like artificial intelligence, digital technology, and advanced technologies. In response to global economic uncertainties, we will also strengthen cooperation on strategic and material supply chains in cutting-edge industries such as energy and biotechnology.
Above all, Singapore is a key economic security partner for us in terms of supply chain security, serving as a strategic hub for maritime logistics connecting the Middle East and Europe. During this visit, we plan to prioritize discussions on supply chain cooperation between the two countries, particularly focusing on energy.
Security will also be addressed. Yoon, before wrapping up his visit, will also take part in the distinguished Singapore lecture series organized by a leading think tank, IC's Yusof Ishak Institute, to introduce Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy, the country's cooperation with ASEAN, and the prospect for peace and prosperity in the region if his vision of Korea unification is achieved. After this will be his main stop of this overseas trip, the ASEAN Summit in Laos. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Singapore.
Marking 1 year since Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, the so-called Axis of Resistance launched a joint attack on Israel, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to continue fighting. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Marking 1 year since the armed conflict between Hamas and Israel began, tensions remain higher than ever as the so-called Axis of Resistance launched joint attacks against Israel. Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis launched a series of airstrikes against Israel on Monday. The Houthi rebels fired surface-to-surface missiles from Yemen, temporarily halting the first anniversary commemoration events held throughout Israel. Hamas also launched a series of rockets from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, while Hezbollah fired a total of 135 rockets. The projectiles were intercepted by Israel, and no casualties were reported from the attacks. During a cabinet meeting on the same day, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stressed that fighting back against Iran's axis of evil is essential to Israel's security. He said Israel will eliminate Hamas and ensure the remaining hostages would be returned safely. The Israeli leader also vowed to prevent another attack like what took place on October 7, 2023 from happening again. U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris marked the first anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel by issuing statements of support for Israel. Biden stressed that Washington remains fully committed to the safety of the Israelis, the security of Israel, and its right to exist. He also said that the U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself from the militant groups as well as Iran. The U.S. leader also said the year-long conflict has resulted in many civilian casualties, which he says was due to terrorists hiding and operating among innocent people. Former U.S. President Donald Trump continued his criticism of the Biden administration, saying that the conflict would not have happened if he was still president. Trump also said he would support Israel striking Iran's nuclear facilities in response to Tehran's missile attacks on Israel last week. According to Trump, Israel is entitled to attack. And amid the escalating tensions in the Middle East, oil prices rose more than 3% on Monday. Brent crude even surpassed $80 per barrel for the first time since August. Last week, Brent rose more than 8%, while West Texas Intermediate rose more than 9% on week after Iran's missile attack against Israel sparked concerns that the response from Israel would be aimed at Tehran's oil facilities. 이승재, Arirang News.
We take a look at where things stand now in Gaza and where to go from here at a moment where regional conflict only expands, with the end barely in sight. Our Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
Over 40,000 deaths and 90% of the Gaza population, amounting to 1.9 million displaced. These are the numbers that are left from the war, with it already being 1 year since the Palestinian militant group Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on Israel from the Gaza Strip. Though devastating it had been throughout the year, experts say there were key dates of the conflict this year that made this war spill into neighboring Lebanon. In May this year, U.S. President Joe Biden called on Hamas to accept a ceasefire proposal of 3 phases, backed by other countries such as Qatar and Egypt. In July, however, as Fuad Shukr, known to have been the right-hand man of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, got killed in an Israeli airstrike, and the head of the political bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, died after having attended the swearing-in of Iranian president, ceasefire talks lost momentum. In September, Israel confirmed the deaths of 6 hostages found in the tunnel complex under Gaza, sparking protests across Israel, with anger directed at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet for failing to secure a hostage deal. One expert says this, in part, led to Netanyahu reaffirming his will to wipe out Hamas and weaken Hezbollah for the sake of his political career and to end the war.
Ever since the war began on October 7th, Israel's 2 goals were to wipe out Hamas and save hostages. And for that, it is necessary to target Hezbollah to some extent, as they have helped Hamas to have force. That is why military operations are currently being carried out in southern Lebanon aimed at weakening Hezbollah.
Given that Israel targeted Hamas and Hezbollah are Iran-backed, concerns are mounting about whether the conflict would lead to a full-fledged war between Israel and Iran. Experts say Iran would not be willing to engage in an all-out war, as it does not have the capability to do so, making it Israel's call.
Israel is expected to retaliate. The intensity of it and to what extent Iran can withstand would be a critical factor. This period of time, right until the US presidential election, is the optimal period for Israel, as once the elections are over and a new president is elected, there may be more pressure against Israel, limiting its room to maneuver.
Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Despite his country facing a security crisis for 1 entire year, it seems like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is nowhere near close to losing power in his country. Now, when will he let go of the Gaza war? For more, we're joined by Professor Robert Lawrence. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
So let's jump right into it. How is Netanyahu really building on his power even further in his country?
Yeah, well, we've seen some polls, recent polls out of Israel, showing that Benjamin Netanyahu and his governing coalition would win if another election were held today. Actually, since the first time since the Hamas attack on October 7th, they would win an outright majority in a hypothetical election. I would argue he's building on the momentum from this recent unprecedented success in dealing with the axis of resistance. They've been able to take down the top three tiers of Hezbollah's command structure. They eliminated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, of all places, and they showed the distance they can cover by hitting the Houthi port of Odesa. They largely repelled the ballistic missile attack last week from Iran, even though some missiles did get through, then they're going unreported. But in general, Israel seems to be on the front foot in this regional conflict that now has 6 or 7 fronts. So he's riding this wave of momentum, but that doesn't necessarily translate into steadfast support in Israel. He still has a lot of domestic problems to deal with, and I think this wave could end quickly if operational success is halted, or if something bad happens to the hostages, or if the axis of resistance continues to be able to hit targets inside of Israel like we've seen in the last 24 hours in Haifa or Tel Aviv.
Well, then does that mean that now we'll continue to, ignore Washington's call for Israel to halt the fighting in Gaza? What do you think?
All right. Well, just days after President Biden pushed for a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon, Netanyahu ordered the strike that killed Nasrallah. Additionally, all of the shuttle diplomacy and the multilateral efforts made during the summer didn't yield any ceasefire in Gaza. So it would appear that the U.S. or the current administration is either not able or not willing to steer Israeli decision-making in the direction it prefers. Naturally, Biden has the capacity to make himself very difficult to ignore if he applies the right pressure.
Right.
But as of yet, I would argue because of U.S. electoral politics, this hasn't been a course of action that the administration deems necessary.
Well, then, do you think Netanyahu's, such firm grip on the war will eventually play a critical role in the upcoming election in November? What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's going to depend on how circumstances evolve in the next days and weeks. So any escalation is going to negatively affect oil prices. And this is happening at a time of economic hardship in America. Americans have been dealing with inflation for years, and adding high energy costs in the lead up to an election is going to hurt the incumbent administration. Also, I believe there's 7 swing states that are all in the margin of error, meaning that the difference between candidates is just 1 or 2 points. Now, in some of these swing states, like Nevada and Pennsylvania, you have large Jewish populations.
Right.
In Michigan, you have a large Arab population. And in a recent poll by the Arab American Institute, Harris is 18 points behind where Joe Biden was in the 2020 election right now. 18 points is very significant. And even actually toe-to-toe amongst likely Arab voters, she's trailing Trump right now. So the administration is walking a bit of a tightrope in its electoral strategy. She can't afford to look weak in support of a major U.S. ally in the region, but she doesn't want to upset the more progressive wing of the party with whom, for whom this is a major issue. So, if you contrast that with the Republicans, there's wide support for Israel. So there's very little risk in sticking to a pro-Israeli agenda for the Trump-Vance ticket. But, if like we saw in the vice presidential debate the other night, this is a very difficult line to take for the Harris-Walz administration or candidacy, because they're more vulnerable to voters' reactions to what happens in the conflict. So Middle East policy could be a determining factor in voting amongst certain demographics. And in swing states, especially where the vote is most important, this could have serious effects.
Well, Professor Lawrence, then why is Israel yet to retaliate against Iran? I mean, is it still contemplating what actions to take? I mean, how likely is it that Israel will hit oil facilities in Iran, like you briefly mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think Israel is taking its time in weighing out its options. It's going to retaliate, but how is difficult to answer. Regarding what Israel will target, There are several options. They could hit conventional military sites like launch sites, command and control centers, and air defenses. Economically, they could hit power generation plants or petrochemical plants. Of course, it could hit Iranian's nuclear facilities, though they are deep in the ground, or try to hit its oil infrastructure. Or in the most extreme case, it could target leadership personnel. And that's an option that would have seemed crazy a couple of months ago, but given the circumstances now, it's on the table, I think. All of these will have repercussions. Iran or its proxies could target Gulf states and their oil infrastructures. Shipping around the Bab al-Mandab and the Red Sea could be under increased threat through the Houthis. Or if the nuclear facilities are hit, that may encourage Iran to withdraw from the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and rush towards making a bomb. So I would imagine there are a lot of robust debates going on in Israeli circles right now about what targets should be in a cost-benefit analysis. But really only the Israeli decision makers know. But I'm sure that oil facilities are near the top of the list.
Right, it won't get any prettier. All right, Professor Lawrence, thank you so much for connecting with us this morning. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
South Korea's current account was in the black for the fourth straight month in August on the back of booming semiconductor exports. Preliminary data from the Bank of Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's current account balance in August recorded a surplus of $6.6 billion. It was driven by the goods account, which tracks exports and imports of products, logging a surplus and recording a 17th month in the black. Exports amounted to more than $57 billion, as semiconductor chip exports rose by over 38% compared to the same month the previous year. South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics recorded a lower than expected operating profit in the third quarter, mainly due to sluggish memory chip sales. On Tuesday, the company reported an estimated operating profit of 9.1 trillion won, or just over $6.7 billion in the third quarter. That's more than double compared to the same period in 2023, but over 10% down from the quarter two this year. However, sales were up by around 17% compared to last year, making it a record high for any quarter. Early on Tuesday, and for the second straight day, North Korea sent trash-carrying balloons toward South Korea. According to the Joint Chief of Staff, the balloons could float toward northern Gyeonggi-do province and other parts of the Greater Seoul area. It called on people to refrain from touching the balloons and to be cautious of the balloons potentially dropping. More than 5,000 balloons have been sent by the North since late May. Russia, for a second consecutive day, attacked a civilian vessel in a Ukrainian Black Sea port. According to Reuters on Monday, a Palau-flagged ship was hit by a Russian ballistic missile in Odesa. Reports say the strike killed one Ukrainian employee of a private cargo handling company and injured 5 foreign nationals. It's the second such strike by Moscow in southern Ukraine this week, after it attacked a civilian vessel loaded with corn on Sunday. Russia has been targeting Ukrainian grain exports since withdrawing from the Black Sea Grain Initiative in July last year. Now, let's take a look at the stories from around the world with our very own Kim Si-young this morning. Good morning, Si-young.
Good morning, Dami.
So let's start in Tunisia. The election results are in, and apparently the incumbent president has won a second term. Fill us in.
That's right, Dami. So the incumbent president, Tunisian President Kais Saied, has secured a second term after winning Sunday's election with a landslide. Now, according to Tunisia's Electoral Commission on Monday, Saied won 90.69% of the vote. Voter turnout was low at 28.8%, which was the lowest since demonstrations in 2011 ousted dictator Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali. 66-year-old Saied, who has been in power since 2019, ran against two candidates, Cha party leader Zuhair Magzawi and Ayachi Zammel, a former lawyer who was jailed in September after gaining traction for election-related offences. Saied has been criticized for hindering the country's change to democracy, stemming from the Arab Spring Revolution in 2011. Tunisia has since seen many of the president's political opponents and other critics arrested, including several presidential contenders and senior figures from the country's biggest parties, while many of Saied's opponents were banned from running in this election. Despite the criticism, Saied called his victory a continuation of the revolution, adding that he will cleanse the country of the corrupt, traitors and conspirators. Now moving on, the mayor of the capital city of Mexico's state of Guerrero was killed on Sunday, less than a week after he took office. Alejandro Arcos was killed just 6 days after becoming mayor of Chilpancingo, a city of some 280,000 people in southwestern Mexico. Guerrero State Governor Evelyn Salgado confirmed Mayor Arcos's death after unverified images had appeared on social media showing the mayor's severed head on top of a pickup truck. The Guerrero State Attorney General's office has said it has begun an investigation into Arcos's murder. Mayor Arcos's death came just 3 days after the city government's new secretary, Francis Tapia, was shot to death. A British doctor pleaded guilty on Monday after attempting an audacious plot to inject his mother's partner with poison. Now, prosecutors said Thomas Kwan, who was in a dispute over the inheritance of his mother's home, disguised himself as a home visit nurse, creating a fake ID and wearing a false mustache, beard and wig. He then drove to his mother's home with false number plates on his car and, while pretending to be the nurse, injected poison into his mother's partner, Patrick O'Hara. The prosecutor said that sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. In the Spanish city of Tarragona, the Catalan traditional contest of building human towers took place on Sunday with a total of 42 teams competing in the biennial Castells competition. Some 11,000 spectators watched the competition, which showcased teams of up to 500 men, women and children compete to build the tallest tower. This year, a team from Villafranca captured the top spot, winning the €16,000 prize. The Castells, or human towers, were added to UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2010, with the first competition taking place in the Tarragona Bull Ring in 1932.
Today marks already the 5th autumn season term out of 6, and this is when dew turns into frost. It's a foggy start to the day for inland regions, with Gimpo, Wonju, and Gwangju International Airport being under a low visibility warning. Meanwhile, rain is in the forecast for the east coast with strong winds. Eastern parts of Gangwon-do could see up to 40 millimeters of rainfall into tonight. Jeju Island will see rain through this morning. The temperature roller coaster keeps on rolling. It's a cooler start to the day, but the highs will be 1 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday afternoon. Now for a closer look, Seoul and Daejeon should be getting up to 24 degrees Celsius. Under sunnier skies this afternoon, Busan will be rainy with a high of 25 degrees. Decent air quality is in the forecast nationwide today. Then rain is in store for Jeju tomorrow on Hangul Day, but the rest of the country will have pleasant autumn weather with large daily temperature differences. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have at this hour. We'll be back with a live coverage of the joint statement from South Korean and Singaporean leaders at 12:45 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.